sleeping in ancient times, calm history for sleep. Let your breath slow down. Let the thoughts that have been circling through your mind today begin to soften and loosen, one by one, like knots gently untied. There is nothing here that requires your attention. Nothing to decide, nothing to manage, nothing to hold on to. There is only this voice, and this story, and a journey back through time to one of the most extraordinary cities the world has ever produced. A city so large and so alive and so completely sure of itself that standing in its streets even now, even across a distance of nearly 2,000 years, you can feel the weight and the warmth and the particular energy of it pressing gently against you from every direction. We are going to Rome, not the Rome of the tourists and the tour guides. Not the Rome of the museums and the carefully roped-off ruins and the audio guides explaining what things used to be. We are going to the living city. The city as it was on an ordinary morning in the year 120 AD, during the reign of the Emperor Hadrian, at a moment when Rome was arguably the most powerful and most sophisticated city on the surface of the earth. Close your eyes and let the world around you soften. Feel the warmth first, the particular warmth of a Roman morning in early summer, not the sharp, demanding heat of the afternoon, but the early warmth, the warmth that has been building since the sun cleared the 7 hills of the city and began its work on the stone and the brick and the terracotta of the streets below. It is a particular kind of warmth, dense and slightly mineral, the warmth of a city built almost entirely from stone and fired brick and concrete, materials that absorb the sun's heat through the day and release it slowly back into the air through the night, so that even in the early morning, before the sun has had time to make its full contribution, the city is already warm, already radiating the stored warmth of the previous day from every surface. The stone beneath your feet is smooth and worn, large, precisely fitted slabs of gray basalt, laid with the careful, confident engineering of a civilization that builds roads and streets the way other civilizations build temples. With the understanding that the quality of the surface beneath your feet is a statement about the quality of the society above it. The air around you is layered with smell, closest and most immediate. The warm, yeasty richness of bread baking somewhere very nearby. The city's bakeries have been burning since long before dawn, their ovens producing the thousands of loaves that a city of this size requires every single day. The smell of that baking has settled into the streets of the surrounding neighborhood like a permanent feature of the environment. Rich and slightly sweet and entirely comforting. Beneath it, the smell of the city itself, of stone and fired brick warmed by the summer sun, of the water that runs in the channels along the edges of the streets, fed by the extraordinary network of aqueducts that brings fresh water into Rome from the mountains and the springs to the east and south, clean and slightly mineral, the smell of water that has traveled far and arrived reliably, as it does every day, as it has done for centuries. And beneath all of that, the deeper, more complex smell of a city of perhaps 1 million people going about their morning. The smell of food being prepared in 1,000 kitchens, of animals in the streets, of the workshops and the tanneries and the fullers and the bakeries and the cookshops all contributing their particular note to the vast, layered, entirely characteristic smell of Rome at the beginning of a working day. Rome in the year 120 AD is the capital of an empire that stretches from the northern edge of Britain to the deserts of North Africa. From the Atlantic coast of Spain to the eastern shores of the Black Sea. It is a city of extraordinary scale and extraordinary diversity. Its streets contain people from every corner of that empire and beyond. Egyptian merchants and Syrian traders, and Greek philosophers and Gallic craftspeople and North African farmers, all of them drawn to Rome by the particular gravity of the world's most powerful city, by the commerce and the opportunity and the spectacle and the sheer, overwhelming vitality of a place that never stops and never sleeps and never ceases to be remarkable. The city is loud. Even at this early hour it is loud. The rumble of delivery carts on the stone streets, the voices of vendors already at their posts on the main thoroughfares, the sound of hammering from a workshop somewhere behind you, the distant sound of the aqueduct water falling into the great cisterns that serve this district. Rome does not do quiet. Even its mornings are busy. Even its nights, when the carts that are banned from the streets during daylight hours finally have their turn, are filled with the rumble of iron wheels on stone and the calls of the drivers navigating the narrow streets in the darkness. But there is a quieter Rome beneath the loud one, a Rome of neighborhood streets and local bakeries and the small daily transactions of ordinary life. The Rome of the people who live here not as visitors or as conquerors or as administrators of empire, but simply as inhabitants, as people for whom this extraordinary city is simply home. That is the Rome we are visiting tonight. The streets we are walking are not the grand ceremonial avenues of the city center, not the Via Sacra with its triumphal arches and its temples and its carefully maintained sense of imperial grandeur. We are in a residential quarter. A neighborhood of insulae, the multi-story apartment buildings that house the majority of Rome's population, their ground floors given over to shops and workshops and the cookshops that feed the city's many residents who have no kitchens of their own. The buildings rise 3 and 4 stories above the street, their upper floors jutting slightly over the pavement below, narrowing the strip of sky overhead to a pale, bright ribbon edged with the irregular roof lines of tiles and wooden balconies, and the occasional washing lines stretched between facing windows. The walls of the ground floor are painted in the deep reds and yellows that the Romans favor, covered with notices and announcements and the small, vivid declarations of daily life. A city that communicates with itself through its walls, that has been doing so for so long that the walls themselves seem to speak, to hold the accumulated voices of all the people who have painted their messages on them over the years. It is a city of nearly unimaginable complexity, and yet it functions. It feeds itself and waters itself and governs itself and entertains itself with the smooth, slightly astonishing efficiency of a machine that has been running long enough to know exactly what it is doing. We are not going to the Forum tonight. We are not going to the Colosseum or the Pantheon or the grand baths of the emperors. We are going to a small bakery on a side street in a residential neighborhood near the Forum of Trajan, where a man named Marcus has been awake since the middle of the night, tending his oven, preparing his dough, doing the quiet, essential, entirely unglamorous work that feeds the neighborhood he has served for nearly 30 years. His name is common. His life is ordinary by the standards of his city, and by almost any other measure it is a life of considerable skill and considerable satisfaction. A life so perfectly fitted to its place and its purpose that it has the quality of something inevitable, something that could not have been otherwise. But we are not quite there yet. First, let us arrive. Let the city settle around you. Let the noise and the warmth and the smell of Rome in the morning find you where you stand. And let the particular, irreplaceable energy of the world's greatest city move through you and around you, gently, without urgency, as it has moved through everyone who has ever stood in these streets, since long before you, and long after. You arrive in Rome just before dawn. The sky above the city is a deep, soft charcoal. Not quite black, not yet the pale blue of morning, something in between. A color that exists only in that brief window before the day has committed to waking. A few stars still hang overhead, faint but present, scattered above the low rooftops and the sloped red tiles that stretch endlessly across the hills of the city. The air is cool, not cold, but refreshingly cool in the way that only autumn mornings can manage. It carries a faint crispness that settles on your skin, like a calm hand pressed gently to your forehead. You are standing at the edge of a narrow street, paved with broad, flat stones. These are the stones of Rome, ancient even by Roman standards, worn smooth by the passage of countless feet across countless years. You can feel their surface beneath your sandals, slightly uneven, slightly warm from the previous day's sun, still holding a memory of heat even now in the earliest hour. The street is wide enough for two people to pass comfortably, flanked on either side by buildings that rise 2, 3, sometimes 4 stories into the still air. These are the insulae, the apartment blocks of Rome, built in terracotta and stone. Their upper floors hung with small wooden shutters. Most of them are still closed at this hour, the whole city still half asleep. Here and there, a thin ribbon of light traces the edge of a shutter from within. Someone else is awake, but mostly, the street is quiet. You begin to walk. The stones carry your footsteps in soft echoes. They vanish quickly into the surrounding walls. The street curves gently ahead of you, following a path laid out not by any careful planner, but by centuries of human habit. People walking the same way, day after day, until the ground simply remembered. On your left, a fountain stands at the corner of the street, a simple carved basin, fed by the aqueduct system that runs beneath and over the city. Even now, a thin stream of water trickles into the basin, murmuring quietly in the stillness. The sound of it is extraordinarily gentle, a soft, continuous whisper of water against stone, no louder than a breath, and yet it fills the whole corner of the street with a feeling of softness, of steadiness, of things continuing as they should. You pause beside the fountain and look around. The neighborhood you have arrived in is one of Rome's many residential quarters, not the grand Palatine Hill where the emperor's residence gleams above the city, not the sprawling commercial heart of the Forum to the west, but something more human than either of those. This is a neighborhood of tradespeople and artisans, of small merchants, and the families who have lived within the same few streets for 3 and 4 generations. The buildings here are modest but cared for. Someone has planted a small pot of rosemary beside a doorway. The soil in it is dark and recently watered. The fragrance drifts faintly toward you, earthy, herbal, clean. Mingling with the other scents of the morning air, there is the smell of stone, cool and faintly mineral. There is the distant, watery smell of the aqueduct. There is something organic and rich rising from the drainage channel along the center of the street. Nothing unpleasant, simply the accumulated evidence of a city alive and in motion, the way a forest smells of soil and old leaves and living things. And beneath all of it, just beginning to thread its way into the morning, there is something warmer, something more welcoming, the very first ghost of a scent, one that will grow over the coming hour into something unmistakable. The smell of bread beginning to bake. You follow the street a little further. The insulae give way briefly to a small open square, not the grand piazza of later centuries, but a humble, practical little open space, perhaps 20 paces across. A few stone benches sit beneath the bare branches of a fig tree. The tree is old. Its trunk has the comfortable, rounded thickness of something that has been growing in the same spot for a very long time, undisturbed and patient. In summer, it would cast a generous circle of shade. In this cool autumn morning, it simply stands, still and gray, its branches fine and intricate against the softening sky. On the far side of the little square, the street narrows again. It descends slightly, following the natural shape of the hillside. The buildings here are closer together. As you make your way along the descending street, the sounds of the city begin, very gradually, to accumulate. A cart rolls somewhere in the distance. The deep rumble of wooden wheels on stone. A sound that carries far in the quiet morning. Then silence again. Then the low, conversational cooing of pigeons settling on a rooftop overhead. A dog trots past the end of the street, unhurried, nose low to the ground, following some private trail that means nothing to you and everything to it. The sky above is changing now. The deep charcoal has begun to soften at its eastern edges. A thin strip of pale gray gold is appearing at the horizon above the rooftops, like a lamp being carried slowly down a corridor from very far away. It is the first suggestion of dawn, tentative and gradual, as if the light is not yet entirely sure it has been invited. It touches the upper stories of the buildings around you first. A warm, amber blush, making the terracotta walls look briefly luminous, almost as though they are generating their own gentle light from within. You stand still for a moment and simply breathe. The air moves slightly, not a wind, barely even a breeze, but a soft shifting of the morning. It carries with it the coolness of the river Tiber. The Tiber itself is invisible from here, but it is present always in the air of Rome, present in the faint mineral dampness that underlies everything, that has underlain everything in this city since before anyone alive can remember. And now, clearly and warmly, the smell of baking bread reaches you properly for the first time. No longer a ghost of a scent, but something real and generous, something that reaches into the body before the mind has time to interpret it, and produces, immediately and without effort, a feeling of comfort, of warmth, of something good being prepared nearby. With care and with patience, you follow it, somewhere just ahead, around the gentle curve of this quiet descending street, in a small bakery that has occupied the same corner of this neighborhood for nearly 30 years. A man named Marcus is already at work. He has been awake for hours. You round the gentle curve of the street, and there it is. The bakery occupies the ground floor of a 2-story building. It sits at the corner where 2 narrow streets meet. Its wide front opens directly onto the pavement in the Roman fashion, without a door or a wall to separate the interior from the world outside. At this hour, a low wooden barrier has been pulled across the front of the shop. Not a locked gate, not a fortress wall, simply a modest partition, waist high. The kind of boundary that says not yet, rather than stay away. Behind it, the interior glows with a warm amber light. It spills softly out onto the stones of the street, drawing a pale golden rectangle on the pavement at your feet. You stop just outside and rest your hands lightly on the wooden barrier. And you look in. The bakery is not a large space, perhaps 8 paces deep and 6 paces wide. Its walls are the color of old cream, stained here and there with pale gray wisps, the ghost marks of decades of flour dust, settled and drifted and settled again, year upon year, until it has become part of the wall itself. From the low ceiling hang several iron hooks. From these hooks hang bundles of dried herbs, rosemary and thyme, and something sharper that you cannot immediately name. Their leaves are dark and brittle, releasing their fragrance slowly and continuously into the warm air of the room. The floor is stone, worn smooth and slightly dipped in the paths that feet have naturally carved across it over many years. From the door to the millstones, from the millstones to the kneading table, from the kneading table to the great domed mouth of the oven. The oven dominates the back wall entirely. It is a magnificent thing, in its own quiet, functional way, built from brick and rubble and Roman concrete. It rises from floor nearly to ceiling in a great rounded mass, its surface pale gray and faintly mottled. Warm to look at even from here. The mouth of the oven is an arched opening about the height of a man's forearm. Dark inside, except for the deep living red of the coals that glow at its base, pulsing slowly, like something breathing, throwing their amber light forward across the bakery floor in long, shifting waves. A thin ribbon of pale smoke rises from the top of the oven, finding its way out through a gap in the ceiling, designed for exactly this purpose. The smell that accompanies it is extraordinary, ancient and comforting. The fundamental smell of heat and grain and transformation, of something raw becoming something nourishing. And there, standing at the long kneading table that runs the length of the bakery's left-hand wall, is Marcus. He is a man of middle years, perhaps 40, perhaps a few years beyond. His exact age softened and made difficult to read by the combination of weather and work that has shaped his face into something settled and unhurried. He is not tall, but he is broad across the shoulders, in the particular way of men who work with their hands and arms every day of their lives. His forearms are dusted to the elbow with flour. His dark hair is close cropped, threaded through with silver at the temples. He wears a simple tunic, belted at the waist, its fabric a plain undyed linen, washed and worn into a gentle softness that speaks of long use and reliability. His hands move steadily through the dough. He is not rushing. There is no urgency in the way he works, no sense of time pressing down on him, no anxious energy in his movements. He has done this so many times, thousands of times, perhaps tens of thousands. The work has long since passed through the stage of effort and arrived at something quieter, something closer to habit, or even to meditation. His hands press and fold and turn, press and fold and turn, working the dough in a rhythm as steady and unhurried as breathing, as familiar as the sound of the fountain at the corner of the street. You watch him for a moment from the doorway. There is something deeply peaceful about observing a person doing work they know completely. There is no performance in it, no self-consciousness. He is simply doing what he does, in the way he has always done it, in the place where he has always done it. The morning is dark and cool outside. The bakery is warm. The coals in the oven breathe their slow red breath, and Marcus's hands move through the dough. He has been awake since the second hour of the night. This is simply how it is for a baker in Rome. While the city sleeps, while the merchants and the senators and the water carriers and the children all lie still in the darkness, the bakers are already lighting their ovens, already reaching their hands into great clay storage jars to lift out the dough that was left to rise the evening before. The city depends on bread the way it depends on water. And bread requires patience. Bread requires time. It requires a person willing to begin the work long before the reward of it is visible. Marcus had risen from his sleeping mat in the small room above the bakery, a room he shares with nothing but a narrow wooden bed frame, a clay lamp, and a few pegs in the wall for his clothing. He had descended the wooden stairs in the dark, without needing to light a lamp to find his way. He knows every creak and slope and worn edge of these stairs. He has descended them in darkness 10,000 mornings. His feet remember them. He fed the oven first. This is always first. The oven must be awake before the baker truly begins, because the oven takes time. A slow, patient building of heat that cannot be rushed. He had opened the iron grate at the oven's base and placed the fuel carefully inside. Bundles of dried wood and brushwood, stacked against the back wall the previous evening, arranged so they would dry overnight and catch easily in the morning. He lit them with an ember carefully preserved from the previous day's fire, carried in a small clay pot, nested in ash to keep it alive through the night. In Rome, fire is precious. Fire is carried from household to household, from oven to oven, passed between neighbors and generations, a living thread of warmth and continuity that stretches back further than anyone can trace. As the fire caught and began to breathe, Marcus turned to the covered clay jars where the dough from the previous evening waited. He had made it the night before from flour ground in his own millstones. The great circular millstones driven by a donkey who now stands patiently in the small yard behind the bakery. Still sleeping, her head low and her breathing long and even. The flour comes from grain delivered twice a week from one of the city's many horia, the great public warehouses near the river, where grain shipped in from Egypt and North Africa is stored. Marcus has a regular arrangement with a particular grain merchant, a slightly built Alexandrian man named Demetrios, with quick eyes and an honest set of scales, and the grain is always good. The dough had risen beautifully in the night, pushed upward by the slow, invisible work of the yeast. He had pressed his fingers into it when he first uncovered the jar, and the dough had responded with exactly the right resistance. Soft and yielding, but with a subtle springiness beneath. A gentle pushback that told him everything he needed to know, without a word being spoken. He had nodded to himself in the lamplight, satisfied. Then he had carried the dough to the kneading table and begun. That was 2 hours ago. Now the oven has been building its heat patiently all the while. The walls of its interior are beginning to radiate with the deep, even warmth that Marcus knows means it is nearly ready. Occasionally he pauses in his kneading and turns to open the oven mouth slightly, holding his hand inside at just the right angle to feel the quality of the heat, not just its intensity, but its evenness, its steadiness. His hand knows what to feel for. His hand has been asking this question of this oven for 23 years. Outside, the sky has continued its slow brightening. The pale gold at the horizon has deepened and widened, spreading upward through gray into a soft, transparent blue. The first birds are beginning to stir in the eaves of the buildings across the street. Small, quick sounds, brief and bright, like scattered notes from an instrument being tuned. The city is beginning to shift in its sleep. Marcus divides the dough. With a practiced gesture, he cuts it into portions using a wooden-handled iron blade, his eye measuring each piece with the quiet confidence of a man who has done this so many times that the eye and the hand have become more accurate than any scale. Each portion is roughly the weight of a standard Roman loaf. Bread that will feed a family for part of a day. Bread that will be carried home in cloth or baskets, or simply tucked under an arm. Bread that will be broken at tables all across this neighborhood. By the time the morning is fully arrived, he begins to shape the loaves. Each one is worked briefly but attentively between his floured palms, shaped into a round, then scored across the top with the small blade. 6 cuts radiating from the center, like the spokes of a wheel. A pattern so familiar and automatic that his hands produce it without any conscious instruction. This scoring is practical. It allows the bread to expand evenly in the oven's heat, but it is also, in its small way, a signature. Anyone in this neighborhood who has bought bread from Marcus would recognize this pattern. Without being told whose oven had made it, He sets the shaped loaves onto the long wooden board beside the oven mouth, and they sit in a quiet row, round and pale and patient, waiting for their turn inside. The sky outside is gold now. The city is waking up, and Marcus is already well into his day. By the time the sun has fully cleared the rooftops and begun its unhurried arc across the Roman sky, the neighborhood has completed its transformation from sleeping to waking, from still to gently, pleasantly alive. It happens gradually, the way all good things happen, not with a sudden jolt, but with a slow accumulation of small details, each one adding quietly to the last, until the whole picture is simply there, fully formed, as natural and inevitable as the morning itself. The wooden barrier at the front of the bakery has been removed. Marcus set it aside just after dawn, leaning it against the interior wall where it will wait until evening. And with that single unhurried action, the bakery became open to the world. The first loaves came out of the oven not long after, lifted from the oven floor on a long-handled wooden peel, the paddle-shaped tool that Marcus moves with the ease of long practice, sliding it beneath each loaf without hesitation, drawing them out one by one into the cooler air of the bakery, where they are set to rest on a wide wooden shelf along the right-hand wall. You watch the first loaves come out, and you understand immediately why bread has always meant more than simply food. Each loaf emerges from the oven transformed. What went in as something pale and soft and provisional comes out as something golden and definite, its surface cracked along the scored lines in exactly the way it should, its crust a deep amber brown, catching the morning light with a faint gloss, as if the bread itself is pleased with what it has become. The smell that accompanies them fills the entire bakery and spills generously out into the street, warm and yeasty and sweet. A smell so fundamentally comforting that it seems to bypass thought entirely and speak directly to something older and quieter inside the body. Within minutes, the first customer appears. She is an older woman, wrapped in a woolen palla the color of rust, a cloth bag hanging from one arm. She stops at the open front of the bakery without ceremony, the way a person stops at a place they have been stopping at for years. She and Marcus exchange the brief, warm greeting of two people who see each other every morning, who have long since moved past the need to be formal about it. She names the number of loaves she wants. He lifts them from the shelf. She places the small coins on the wooden counter with a familiar click of bronze on wood, tucks the loaves into her bag, and continues on her way. This is how the morning proceeds. One customer at a time, then two at once, then a small cluster of people who stand at the front of the bakery and talk among themselves while they wait. A young man carrying an empty basket for his employer. Two women from the upper floors of the nearest insula who have come down together and continue their conversation uninterrupted throughout the entire transaction. A gray-bearded man who examines each loaf with careful deliberation before choosing. Every single morning, the one that Marcus had already predicted he would choose, there is a comfortable rhythm to all of it, a gentle human traffic, flowing past the bakery's open front like a slow stream moving around a familiar stone. Between customers, Marcus works. More dough is already prepared for the second baking. He mixes and kneads in the quieter intervals, his hands returning automatically to the table whenever the counter is momentarily empty. The oven must be tended, its fire fed at careful intervals, to maintain the steady heat that good bread requires. The millstones need their morning attention. Marcus checks the gap between the upper and lower stone with a practiced touch, adjusting slightly when needed. ensuring the grind will be even and fine for the next batch of flour. The donkey has been brought around from the yard behind the bakery, harnessed to the long wooden arm that drives the upper millstone. She moves in her slow, patient circle without complaint, her hooves making a steady rhythmic sound on the stone floor. A sound that becomes, over the course of the morning, simply part of the bakery's ambient music. The low grinding of the millstones, the soft crackle of the oven, the occasional murmur of conversation at the counter, and beneath all of it, always, the distant trickling of the fountain at the corner of the street. You step away from the bakery for a while and let yourself drift into the wider neighborhood. The streets around Marcus's bakery are fully alive now, and the life in them is rich with texture and detail. The insulae above you cast long shadows across the narrow streets in the morning light, their upper floors busy with the small industry of domestic life. A woman beats a cloth against a windowsill. A child peers down from a high shutter with enormous, interested eyes. Someone on a third floor is singing something low and half-hearted to themselves, the melody drifting down in fragments. Washing has been hung between buildings on lines stretched across the street at rooftop height. The linens move softly in the light air, white and pale ochre and faded blue, filtering the sunlight into something gentle and diffuse. At the end of the street, a fuller's workshop occupies a wide ground floor space. You pass its open front and catch the sharp, astringent smell of the work being done inside. Cloth being cleaned and processed. The workers moving in their slow, methodical way. The sound of water and the particular muffled percussion of the work, rhythmic and oddly soothing from a distance. Next to the fullers, a small shop sells oil. Great ceramic amphorae standing upright in a row along the wall, their pointed bases embedded in a low shelf of sand, their stoppers sealed with wax. The whole arrangement giving the shop the dignified, orderly look of something that has been arranged and rearranged thousands of times into exactly this configuration. Beyond that, the street opens briefly onto a small market, not the grand market of the Forum. Not the sprawling, magnificent Trajan's market that rises in its great semicircle near the Forum of Trajan. That belongs to the grander, more public life of the city. This is a neighborhood market, a daily gathering of perhaps a dozen vendors who set up their tables and baskets and low wooden stalls in the widened section of the street every morning and dismantle them every afternoon. You walk through it slowly, letting the details settle around you like leaves drifting down on a windless day. A vegetable seller has arranged her goods with obvious care. Heads of fennel fanned out in a row, their feathery fronds still green and fresh. Dark olives piled in a shallow clay bowl, gleaming with oil. Bundles of turnips and leeks tied neatly with twine. Dried figs laid out in rows on a cloth, their skins wrinkled and sweetly fragrant. Beside her, a man sells garum from small clay pots, the fermented fish sauce that is to Roman cooking what salt and flavor are combined. Its smell pungent and complex, nothing like pleasant in isolation, but present in some form in nearly every dish prepared in nearly every kitchen in this city. He fills small vessels for his customers with a practiced ladle. The transactions brief and efficient. A little further along, a woman sells hot food from a thermopolium, a built-in counter of stone with circular openings in its surface, each holding a ceramic vessel of something warm. You pause near it and let the smells reach you. Something bean-based and deeply savory, something spiced with cumin and coriander. A lentil stew whose fragrance is dense and satisfying. The kind of smell that makes the body remember it is tired and hungry, and that warmth is available. A group of men stop at the counter on their way somewhere, eating quickly from small bowls, talking in the unhurried shorthand of people who know each other well. Their Latin quick and comfortable, full of the elisions and compressions of everyday speech, rather than the formal cadences of rhetoric or record. You drift back toward the bakery as the sun reaches its highest point. The light at midday is generous and even, falling straight down into the streets, illuminating the worn stones with a brightness that makes everything look clean and almost luminous. The shadows have retreated to the narrowest corners, tucked under eaves and behind doorways. The city sits in its full midday warmth with a kind of contented stillness. The morning's urgency, such as it was, and it was never very urgent, has given way to the slower pace of midday, that long, warm pause in the Roman day, when the most sensible thing and the most common thing is to find a patch of shade and simply rest. Marcus eats his own midday meal at the back of the bakery. He sits on a low wooden stool near the open back door, the door that leads to the small yard where the donkey stands, drowsing in the shade of a single old laurel tree. He eats slowly and without fuss, bread, naturally, torn from a small loaf of his own making, along with a handful of olives from a clay pot he keeps on a shelf near the back wall, some hard cheese wrapped in cloth, and a cup of well-watered wine, the thin, slightly sour, everyday wine of working Romans, drunk more for refreshment than pleasure. He eats in the quiet way of a man who is comfortable in his own company, looking out through the open door at the small yard, at the laurel tree and the donkey, his hands still faintly floury despite having wiped them, his expression settled and at ease. The afternoon baking is still ahead of him, but for now, in the warm midday pause, there is only this: a man sitting at the back of his bakery, eating bread he made with his own hands, in the city where he has lived his entire life, under a sky that is wide and blue and entirely unhurried. The sun moves slowly toward the western edge of the city, and Rome begins almost imperceptibly to exhale. It happens in the same way it always happens, not as a single moment, not as any one thing you could point to and say, there, that is where the day ended, but as a gradual softening of everything at once. The light is the first thing to change. The hard, even brightness of midday begins to warm and deepen, shifting by slow degrees from white gold to amber, from amber to something richer and more honeyed, a light that falls now at a lower angle across the streets and buildings, touching everything it finds with a gentleness that the midday sun, for all its generosity, never quite manages. The walls of the insulae glow warmly. The worn stones of the street take on a depth and color they do not have at noon. Even the dust, drifting lazily in the last of the afternoon warmth, catches the low light and turns briefly golden before settling. You are standing near the fountain at the corner of the street. The water in the basin has turned the color of pale copper in the evening light. You trail your fingers through it. It is cool, almost cold, fed from deep underground, where the temperature never changes regardless of the season. The sensation is a quiet, pleasant contrast to the warmth of the air around you. Down the street, Marcus is beginning to wind down. The afternoon baking finished an hour ago. The second batch of loaves long since out of the oven and mostly sold. The last few remaining on the shelf, available for whoever comes by in these final hours before the bakery closes for the day. The pace of customers has slowed to a trickle, an occasional figure stopping briefly, exchanging a few words, taking a loaf or two and moving on. Between these last visitors, Marcus is occupied with the quiet work of ending the day, wiping down the kneading table with a damp cloth, gathering the scattered flour that has drifted across every surface in the fine, inevitable way of flour, sweeping the stone floor with a wide bristled broom, whose strokes produce a soft, rhythmic whisking sound, mingling with the distant murmur of the street. The oven is being allowed to cool. This is a slow process, something that happens on its own terms and cannot be hurried. Marcus has stopped feeding the fire. The coals are settling now into a lower, quieter version of themselves, still glowing, still warm, still useful in a residual way for keeping things gently heated, but no longer fierce, no longer demanding. The great domed body of the oven radiates its stored warmth into the bakery in long, soft waves. The room is suffused with a deep, comfortable heat that feels almost like a living presence. Like sitting near a fire that has been burning so long it has become simply part of the room. Outside, the neighborhood is performing its own evening rituals. The vegetable seller from the morning market is packing away her unsold goods with practiced efficiency, folding her cloth and stacking her empty baskets. The fennel fronds now slightly wilted, the olives nearly gone. The oil seller has already pulled his shutters across. The fuller's workshop has fallen quiet, its workers dispersed into the streets and stairwells of the surrounding buildings, heading home to their rooms in the upper floors of the insulae, to whatever simple meal and rest the evening offers. The thermopolium woman is stirring the last of her lentil stew in its ceramic vessel, her movements unhurried and thoughtful, the steam rising in a thin, fragrant column that catches the slanted light and disappears. Children are being called in from the streets. You hear it from various directions. Voices from upper floor windows, from doorways. The particular tonal quality of a parent's call that crosses every language and every century. That particular mix of affection and mild insistence that means come inside now, the day is done. And gradually, the children come. Small figures disengaging from whatever games and negotiations have occupied the last hours of the afternoon, drifting toward their respective doorways in the slow, reluctant way of children who are not quite ready to concede that the day is over, running their hands along walls, pausing to examine something on the ground, arriving eventually at the threshold where the evening meal and the warmth of the family await. You walk slowly along the street as the light continues its long decline. A man sits on a stone step outside the building next to the bakery, leaning back against the door frame, his legs stretched out before him on the pavement. He is an older man, perhaps a retired craftsman, the kind of man who has reached an age where sitting outside in the evening and watching the street is not idleness, but a perfectly sufficient occupation. He has a small cup of wine resting on the step beside him. He is not reading, not talking, not doing anything in particular, simply sitting, watching the street with the mild, contented attention of someone who finds the ordinary world consistently interesting. He nods at you as you pass, a small, unhurried acknowledgement, and returns his gaze to the middle distance. The smell of cooking is everywhere now. It rises from the thermopolium, from the small internal courtyards of the larger buildings, from the windows of the upper floors where the portable clay braziers that serve as household stoves are being lit for the evening. Wood smoke and olive oil, garlic softening in a pan, the deep savory warmth of beans long cooked, the faint sharpness of wine being poured, all of it drifting down into the streets, mingling into a single composite smell. That is simply the smell of a Roman neighborhood at dinner time. Unremarkable to anyone who lives here, and deeply, quietly wonderful to you. Marcus takes down the last 2 loaves from his shelf and wraps them in a cloth. He will take one upstairs for his own supper. The other he sets on the counter with a small stone on top to hold the cloth, left for whoever might pass and need it before the morning. This is not unusual. Marcus has done this most evenings for as long as he can remember. a quiet habit, unpublicized and unannounced. A loaf left at the end of the day for whoever finds it. He does not think of it as generosity particularly. It is simply what you do with bread that is left over. Bread is not something you let go to waste. He stands for a moment at the front of the bakery, one hand resting on the wooden barrier he is about to put back in place, and looks out at the street. The last light of the sun is just catching the tops of the buildings on the far side of the road. A thin line of warm gold running along the roof tiles, while the street below has already settled into a soft blue-gray shadow. A cat moves silently along the base of the opposite wall, stops to examine something invisible, and then continues on. Somewhere further down the street, two people are talking in low voices, their words indistinguishable, their tone unhurried and easy. The particular cadence of an evening conversation that has nowhere to be and is in no hurry to end. Marcus replaces the barrier across the front of the bakery. It settles into its familiar position with a small, solid sound, wood against stone. And then the bakery is closed, and the day's work is complete. He gathers his cloth-wrapped loaf and climbs the wooden stairs to his room above. His footsteps slow and even on each familiar step, the lamplight from the small clay lamp he carries casting a warm, moving circle around him as he ascends. The stairwell smells of old wood and dust, and the faint, lingering warmth that rises from the bakery below. A warmth that permeates the entire building from foundation to roof tile, and makes the upper rooms, even on cool autumn evenings, gentle and comfortable. Below, the oven continues its long, slow cooling. The coals settle with an occasional soft tick of contracting heat. The only sound now in the empty bakery, the flour dust drifts imperceptibly in the residual warmth. The herbs hanging from the iron hooks release their fragrance into the stillness. Rosemary and thyme, and that sharper note you could not name this morning. All of it mingling with the last ghost of the baking smell into something warm and faintly sweet and entirely peaceful. Outside, the street is nearly quiet. The city is settling itself in for the night. Night comes to Rome, the way sleep comes to a tired body, gradually, completely. And with a feeling of deep relief, the last colors of the sunset have been fading for some time now, withdrawing slowly from the sky the way the tide withdraws from a shore, leaving behind a darkness that is not harsh but simply quiet, a deep, soft blue-black, settling over the rooftops and the streets and the hills of the city, like a cloth laid gently over something precious. The stars appear one at a time, unhurried, each one simply present, where a moment ago there was only depth and darkness, and then there are many of them, scattered thickly across the sky above the city, in patterns that the Romans have named and studied and navigated by for centuries. Fixed and familiar and quietly magnificent. The moon tonight is nearly full. It has risen above the eastern rooftops, hanging in the sky with a calm, steady brightness. Its light falls into the streets below at the same low angle as the setting sun, casting long, cool shadows in the opposite direction, painting the worn stones of the pavement with a pale silver-blue light that makes them look like the surface of still water. The fountain at the corner of the street catches the moonlight in its basin and holds it, the slow trickle of water from the aqueduct fracturing the reflection into 1,000 shifting pieces, before it settles again into stillness. You walk slowly through the night streets, and the city that surrounds you is not frightening or uncertain. It is simply resting. The insulae rise on either side of the street, their upper floors dark and quiet, their shutters closed against the autumn chill. Here and there, a thin line of amber light traces the edge of a shutter where a lamp still burns inside, Someone reading by lamplight, perhaps, or a mother sitting with a restless child, or simply a person who is not quite ready to let the day go entirely. But these small lights are widely spaced, islands of wakefulness in a sea of sleep. They make the surrounding darkness feel not emptier, but somehow warmer by contrast. Evidence of lives continuing quietly behind closed walls. The sounds of the night are completely different from the sounds of the day. Gone are the voices and footsteps and the rolling of carts, the grinding of the millstones, the commerce and conversation of the market. In their place is something simpler and more spacious. The continuous soft murmur of the fountain, present now as the dominant voice of the neighborhood. Rather than one sound among many, the distant calling of a nightbird from somewhere near the laurel tree in Marcus's yard. A brief and liquid sound that rises and falls and then is gone, leaving the silence feeling even more complete than it did before. The occasional soft footstep of the night watchman, the vigilals, doing his patient rounds through the sleeping streets, his lamp swinging slightly as he walks, casting a small moving circle of gold on the pavement that passes and fades and is gone. The air has grown cooler, not cold, but cool in a way that is entirely comfortable, carrying the particular clean freshness of a Roman autumn night. Washed through by the steady breath of the Tiber and the distant hills, you pull your cloak a little closer and simply stand for a moment in the middle of the moonlit street, and you breathe. And the breathing is easy and slow and requires no effort at all. Above the bakery, in his small room, Marcus is already asleep. He did not stay awake long after climbing his stairs. He ate his evening bread slowly, sitting on the edge of his sleeping mat with the lamp burning low on the floor beside him, tearing the loaf in small pieces and eating without hurry, looking at nothing in particular, his mind moving in the unhurried, undemanding way of a tired body at the end of a long day. Not thinking exactly, but drifting, revisiting the day in gentle fragments, the way you might turn over smooth stones on a riverbed. Not looking for anything specific, simply feeling their familiar weight and texture. The woman in the rust-colored palla, the young man with the basket, the gray-bearded man choosing his loaf with great deliberation. The second batch of bread that came out of the oven slightly darker than intended. Dark but good. The crust a deep mahogany that cracked cleanly when pressed. He had set the lamp out with a soft breath and lain down, and the darkness of the room had settled around him immediately, familiar and complete. Smelling of old wood and the warm breath of the oven rising from below, and he had been asleep within minutes. His breathing is slow and even now, rising and falling in the quiet room, perfectly steady, like the coals in the oven below, still cooling, still releasing their warmth in long, patient waves. Into the darkness of the empty bakery, you drift back downstairs, not to disturb anything, only to look once more at this quiet room where so much simple, useful, beautiful work happens every day. The bakery at night is entirely still. The kneading table is clean and bare, its surface pale in the moonlight that falls through the open upper portion of the front wall. A small rectangle of silver laid across the wooden surface like a cloth. The millstones stand silent, enormous and patient in their housing. The long wooden arm of the donkey harness resting motionless. The herbs hang from their iron hooks in the darkness, giving off their quiet fragrance without any audience at all, simply because that is their nature. The mouth of the oven is a dim, dark arch now, the coals within reduced to the faintest ember glow, a deep and sleepy red, barely visible, like the last trace of a sunset at the very edge of the horizon. just before it disappears entirely. If you held your hand before it, you would feel a ghost of warmth. The stored heat of the day slowly, peacefully releasing itself into the room, and from the room into the cool night air outside. Tomorrow morning, Marcus will come down these stairs again before dawn. He will carry his small clay pot of ember, carefully kept alive through the night. He will kneel before the oven and coax the new fire from the old one, and the bakery will slowly fill again with warmth and light, and the extraordinary smell of bread beginning to happen. The donkey will be harnessed. The dough will be uncovered. The morning will begin its patient, unhurried unfolding, exactly as it did today, exactly as it will the day after tomorrow, and the day after that, in this small, warm room, at the corner of this quiet street, in this ancient, breathing, endlessly living city. But that is tomorrow. Tonight, everything rests. The fountain murmurs at the corner of the street, as it has murmured through every night that anyone alive can remember. Its voice small and steady and entirely content. The moonlight moves in its slow arc across the rooftops, shifting the shadows by degrees so gradual that no single moment of change can be identified. Only the difference between how things looked an hour ago and how they look now. The city of Rome lies under its wide sky. Nearly 1 million lives, all breathing slowly in the darkness, all suspended in the same deep, shared quiet. You stand for one last moment in the moonlit street outside the bakery, and you let the stillness of it settle into you completely. There is nothing required of you here. There is nowhere to be, nothing to do, no decision waiting to be made. There is only this cool night air, and the soft sound of water, and the smell of old stone and rosemary, and the last faint warmth of a day's baking drifting out through the walls of a small bakery, in a city that has been standing for 800 years, and will stand for centuries more. Let your eyes close. Let the sounds of Rome carry you. The fountain, the night bird, the slow and steady breathing of a city that knows, after all these centuries, exactly how to rest. You are safe here, in this ancient, gentle place. The night is long and quiet and entirely peaceful, and there is nothing left to do now but sleep. Sleep now. Thank you for listening. New stories every week.